Hello and welcome to another episode of the Lit Podcast Live Tuesday Night Tea. I am your host, Juana Lyles, and you all are very welcome to being here, whether you're watching it right now, later on tonight, or tomorrow, 5 years from now, or 15 years from now. You are all welcome, and I appreciate your support. Today, we're still in June. Obviously, it's like the second week of June, but we are in June, and June is PTSD Awareness Month, amongst so many other types of months for this year. So we're going to be talking about PTSD awareness this month, as well as men's health for this month. And, we do have a Father's Day coming up as well. So just welcome. Y'all come on in and we're going to start discussing some stuff and getting started. I am using StreamYard. So please, if you are watching and it asks if we could use your have access to your name, please give StreamYard access to your name so that I can see who you are and you can join in the conversation, because I love connecting with you all. And I see one of my favorite people in the whole world, Mr. Greg. Hey, you guys, he was so instrumental in my life growing up. So I just appreciate you, Mr. Greg. And I'm not used to calling him Mr. Greg, but yeah, it's always been like, he was my sensei growing up. So yeah. So welcome in. And you guys, also tomorrow I'm going to post something up from him as well. But tomorrow also catch me at 11, because it is men's health awareness. And we're going to be talking about some issues that men have, some sexual disorders this month with my coaching group. So, if you can catch that at 11, if not, you always can join in later. Okay. But welcome. Come on in wherever you are, and we'll get started in just a moment as I'm allowing people time to come on in. But you guys, this month is going to be pretty informational, as we're celebrating men's health and awareness and PTSD awareness, because sometimes there are things that you have going on, you as a man, you as a loved one of a man, or if you have a man in your life, whether it's your son, husband, partner, father, brother, cousin, whoever, a nephew, whoever it is, a neighbor even. Some of this information that we'll be sharing this month will be very important to pass on to those loved ones or friends that you may have. Okay. So I am going to go ahead and get started. So I wanted to read something about PTSD actually that I got. It's a little bit of a history, and some of this information you may know, but some of it you may not, because some of it surprised me as well. Like this first sentence that I'm going to talk to you about, because when we think of PTSD, we commonly think about people from the military, right? But PTSD is not a newly recognized mental disorder, not at all. The information that I found says that this disorder dates back to 50 BC. That's before Christ, right? 50 BC, 50 before Christ was born. Wow. And I saw Michelle, you just came in. So, hey, yeah, big hair, don't care, girl. So it says that the disorder dates back to 50 BC, when it was described in a poem by Hippocrates. Wow. That was so, like, I was just like, wow, I didn't know, like, that was something that was new for me. But anyway, it says that he talks about the experiences of a soldier returning home after a battle. PTSD started gaining more attention after the wars between England and France, when many people, civilians and soldiers alike, reported experiencing symptoms like anxiety, insomnia, intrusive and disturbing thoughts, and flashbacks. This continued throughout World War I and World War II, with PTSD being named as shell shock, and battle fatigue. It was during the 1970s Vietnam War that the mental disorder was renamed PTSD. So that's the part that I knew, like from Vietnam. I didn't really, and I heard about shell shock as well, but I didn't even think about people be like way before like World War II, really. So anyway, it goes on to say earlier treatments related to electric shock therapy and other painful options. So that's what people did. You may have seen something like that on movies or heard about it as well. But today, thankfully, due to modern technology and all the research that we have done, we don't have to do those extreme, torturous types of therapies. There are much more um, like better and effective treatments out there now. So some of them include group therapy, just regular individual counseling, and of course, medicine, which y'all know I'm not a big fan of medicine, but some people do need to take medicine, okay? So what is PTSD actually? And I know that if you read the description, we're going to talk about more specifically what we consider is big T and little t. And so those are big T traumas and little t traumas. So in order to get a diagnosis of PTSD, according to our book that we use in counseling, and the the physician's book, basically it's the DSM-5. It You have to have like a life-threatening experience. So that's where the little t's come in, but I'll talk a little bit more about that later on. Okay, I want to give you a main definition of PTSD. So PTSD is post-traumatic stress disorder. It's a mental health condition caused by experiencing a traumatic event. And PTSD can start to interfere with your routine daily functioning. And if it goes untreated, it can cause more symptoms like the nightmares, anxiety, and avoidance of certain places or situations, kind of like what those people from back in the early wars, they were having those symptoms, with the nightmares and memories of the trauma. Okay. And so that's one thing that you have to have in order to get diagnosed with PTSD is, one, you have to have a traumatic, life threatening type of event. And two, you have to have avoidance or like memory issues such as flashbacks or avoidance issues, as well as something like nightmares. Okay. So if you don't have those, they won't necessarily diagnose you with PTSD. But that doesn't mean that you didn't have trauma. Okay. So just wait up and listen to see if you have experienced a type of trauma. Okay. And hello, sweetheart. My husband is on. So thank you for joining us. So here's some quick facts that I wanted to share with you about just PTSD and trauma. 8% of the population will experience PTSD. So the National Center for PTSD states that around 7 to 8% of the population will experience PTSD in their lifetimes. And so something that I wanted to share too is that just because you have PTSD doesn't mean that you will always have it. Like, it can actually be cured and treated and go away. Okay. There are some people that are longtime sufferers, and it will continue on with their nightmares and memories and things like that, or just because something triggers them and then it can kind of come back. Okay. Women are more likely to be PTSD sufferers than men. Okay. It says that women are twice more likely to suffer from PTSD than men due to a sexual assault or trauma event. So that's what kind of puts them at a higher risk, is because of sexual assaults. Then we talk briefly about this big T and small t types of trauma. So there are two types of trauma, and this is what I've been talking about. And they range in the severity of the causes and triggers. So big T is any type of trauma that has occurred due to a life-threatening situation, like we've already talked about, like the wars That's why we all pretty much know it around military type of things, right? So it's like combat related, because when people go to war, their life is threatened, right, on a daily basis. So then there's also natural disasters. So I know here in Alabama, we not too long ago, maybe what, like 2 or 3 years ago, there was a huge tornado that that unfortunately like 20 something people lost their lives, and it was just a small town. And so many families, some of them were all family, like, so like there would be a family of seven that were in that situation. So natural disasters, um, such as tornadoes, hurricanes, earthquakes, any type of natural disaster. Okay. Then there's physical assault, actually like getting beat up, robbed, something like that. And so then small t's are caused due to a disturbing event that is not life threatening. So something like maybe a divorce, it could be an abrupt relocation. So, like, even children being taken away from their home, like if there was something going on in the home and then people just come in and take the kids, right? So abrupt relocation or removal from the home. Financial woes could be considered little t traumas. Relationship breakups, those could be little t traumas. Even loss of a pet could be a little t trauma. So anyway, I'm going to keep going. Trembles are normal after trauma. Experts state that it's completely normal and healthy, actually, to experience shivers and trembling after a traumatic or stressful event, as that's the body's way to release all of that excess adrenaline. So you got to think during a traumatic event, you have an increase in adrenaline, which is hormone in your body. And so, like, to kind of shake it off is what happens. Okay. So that's where the shivers and trembling come in. And so then I also want to tell you this. Hey, Ryan, my favorite daughter-in-law. Um, PTSD is not just from personal experience. So people that have been diagnosed with PTSD don't always have to experience the life-threatening traumatic experience themselves. So they could also have heard about it or witnessed someone else going through the traumatic event. So I'm going to just say, for instance, like a child being subjected to like parental physical abuse. So like their parents are fighting, whether it's, physical fighting actually, or threatening of like one another's life. So a child witnessing that, it could cause trauma for that child. Okay. And so we do, like I said, we associate veterans and war and military service with PTSD. But you guys, it can manifest after experiencing any kind of traumatic event. And like, we've talked about some are physical abuse, sexual abuse, domestic violence, even getting into a fatal car accident. I hadn't mentioned that one, but a fatal, like, or a near fatal car accident rather. Or just being aggressively harassed, bullied, like being bullied at school or work even. And so those are all signs, those are all types of trauma that you can experience that cause you to have PTSD. And so some of the symptoms that people can get are feelings of hopelessness, guilt, and shame, which is, somewhat related to like depression type symptoms. Okay. But then the guilt and shame are key. Irritability and aggressiveness. So if you start feeling very irritable for no reason, or you're over, what people would consider overreacting to like something that could be a mild, or not, it shouldn't, like a mild irritant. So it shouldn't, like, you shouldn't blow up and like start punching the walls or things like that because of something small and simple. So people see it as overreacting. Okay, so that aggressiveness. Memory issues. So it's not uncommon for people to not even remember all aspects of the traumatic event even. So just thinking about that too. As stated previously, having nightmares about the event itself, and nightmares can even include like related types of incidents. So it doesn't have to be the actual event being repeated, but just nightmares similar to that. Like, so I work with a lot of veterans, and so some of the things that veterans have told me was not necessarily that they have like see the nightmare of like what happened with them being replayed. That's not what they're having the nightmare about, but sometimes it's like a nightmare of like someone chasing them, or they're chasing someone, or they never find that person, things like that. Okay. Hypervigilance. So that's also being easily startled. So you're going to be constantly on guard, looking around, you hearing things and you're like, "Ooh, what's that?" So that's what hypervigilance and being easily startled looks like. Having flashbacks of the event. So that's like actually like where a flashback is actually like where you're reliving it. So it's almost like you're there all over again. Okay. Avoiding situations that remind you of the traumatic event. So, I think you may have heard me talk about I was in a car accident. It wasn't near fatal, but I was in a really bad car accident. So I would not go, instead of going down that street, I went all the way around town instead of just going down this street that I could get there in 5 minutes. I would take like a 20-minute route just to get to the same place, so that I wouldn't have to go into that same area. Detachment from others. So that, like not being around your family and friends, things like that. So people are saying, come on, let's go. And you're like, no, I just want to stay home. Difficulty concentrating. So not being able to focus on things and concentrate on the work that you're doing, and your mind kind of wandering off. Feeling emotionally numb. And because again, like I do work with a lot of veterans, that is what a lot of them experience is. And I'm going to just share, and again, I didn't put a disclaimer out, but I don't want anyone to be triggered. So this, some of this things that we are talking about may be triggering to you. So if it is, please turn it off. You don't have to listen, but I just want to bring awareness. Okay. But feeling emotionally numb. So you got to think about it. If you're in a war zone situation and your life is constantly being threatened, and then people around you are actually dying, you kind of turn off your emotions, because then you could put yourself and your comrades into danger, right? So you kind of just turn off emotionally. And so even with, I haven't talked about this one yet, but like racial trauma, right? We or just violence, like a lot of killings and death and things like that that we're exposed to just watching the news, right? We can become emotionally numb, which is also kind of like a desensitization. Okay. So it's just like, yeah, whatever, we don't really have any feelings toward anything. And then the last two symptoms I want to talk about is difficulty maintaining close relationships. And then also with that one, typically too, when people have sexual trauma, they can become more promiscuous. I know it doesn't seem like it goes together, but yes. So, but either way, you can still have trouble having and maintaining close relationships, whether they're intimate or just like with family and friends. And then lastly, trouble sleeping. Okay. And that kind of is because you're having, it's harder for you to fall asleep or stay asleep or even wake up. Okay. And so then I want to talk about some types of trauma. So like if you look this up, you would come up with different things. Like, so there's types of trauma in the sense of like what we just talked about, like war, um, sexual assault, physical assault, child abuse, those kinds of traumas. But I'm going to talk to you about three different types of trauma, which is the categories of trauma. Okay. So we have acute trauma, which means that it's just a single event that causes stress or put you in danger. Acute trauma can include, like we talked about, those life-threatening types of situations, as well as the little t's. Okay. Chronic trauma is repeated and prolonged exposure to highly stressful events. So some of those include like child abuse, bullying, or domestic violence. So that's just like an ongoing. So acute trauma is one time type of thing, and chronic is like it's ongoing. Okay. And then complex trauma is a repeated exposure to multiple and varied traumatic events. So that means you've had more than one type of trauma, basically. So it could be a couple of acute traumas or a couple of acute traumas and chronic trauma. See how that works? And so that's the breakdown of acute, chronic, and complex. And so if you think about it, well, I'm going to ask you afterwards. So I want to talk real quick about some little t traumas and some big T traumas. So like what do those really look like? I just want to break that down a little bit. Okay. So a little t trauma or a small t trauma. I just, it's like I want to repeat that it's not common, like a small t trauma, they get overlooked, right? And so for us to be diagnosed with PTSD, it's usually about those big T traumas, okay? Because they consider that little T traumas don't lead to development of pure PTSD symptoms. But it still is a traumatic response, okay? So I don't want you to get confused, but you still can have symptoms of kind of like what PTSD look like, but they just call it more of a severe traumatic response, okay? So small T traumas are events that exceed our capacity to cope and cause a disruption in our emotional functioning. So that's why these events are distressing events that are not necessarily life-threatening or causing bodily harm to us, but they're more described as ego-threatening. Okay, and like it causes an emotional distress because we feel bad or we hurt. Okay, we feel hopeless or helpless. All right. So some of those include interpersonal conflict, just your stuff going on within yourself, like having the low self-esteem and low confidence and things like that. Infidelity, right? Um, Infidelities, like, someone cheating on you, things like that. Divorce. So that, well, I want to go back. So infidelity, also thinking about like a breakup, a bad breakup and things like that. Divorce could be a little T trauma, right? Either yourself or your parents experiencing a divorce. Then I mentioned this one earlier too, abrupt or extended relocation. So you had to go somewhere for a longer time than you wanted to or intended, or you were just kind of removed quickly. Legal troubles could cause little T traumas. Getting locked up for a little bit, not necessarily a long extent in jail, but just um, or just being on trial or arrested in any kind of way. Like I had a little T trauma when I got a speeding ticket, and I had, or not a speeding ticket, but I was in another car accident. Lord, I've had a lot of car accidents, right? But I was in a car accident, and then it was I was counted as being at fault, but it wasn't really my fault. Is because I hit someone only because somebody else did something dangerous, and I had to swerve, and then I ended up hitting someone. So anyhow, I had to go to court, but it was dismissed. But I was so terrified and so scared, and it was a lot for me. So that's like a legal trouble, okay? And then we mentioned this one as well: financial worries or difficulties. And so small t traumas tend to be overlooked, as I said, because of like they're typically overlooked by the individual. So not only do other people overlook them, but the individual themselves. So like me, it's like, no, it wasn't that bad, right? So we kind of minimize it. And this is sometimes we do that because we try to rationalize the experience as common, or we're ashamed, really ashamed and embarrassed about our reaction. Like if somebody broke up with you or cheated on you, you don't want to be like, oh my gosh, this is so horrible. And then everybody's like, girl, get over him, or do you better than that. So you don't want people to see you have this overreaction or being dramatic. So you kind of minimize it, and you're just like, yeah, I ain't need him anyway, or whatever, right? So that is actually a form of avoidance. So, because we don't want to, like, we invalidate our emotions and we try to, like, push them away and make them not be as bad as they really are for us. Okay. So then let's see. Um, so I also want to add this, that even though like one small T, one of those events may not lead to significant distress, but think about if you have multiple ones, okay? So let me grab some pens. Okay, so let's just say, let me come back so I can see y'all real quick. I was trying to look at my notes. Okay, so I have all these pens. So I had my parents divorced when I was little. I watched, my grandmother die. Like, I was there when she took her last breath. Then right on top of that, my dog died. Then, let's see, something else. My boyfriend broke up with me, right? And let's see, I can't even think of anything else. But let's just say we have all these little things that happen, right? And so you can count them yourself. What are all these little things that add up? Oh, your best friend moved away, you know? All this stuff happened to me when I was 16. Not really. I'm just using an example. So I have 6 things here that have happened to me between the time I was 14 and 16. Let's just say that, right? So think about this. Look at this. Here's this. Actually, I'm going to switch this out. Okay, so I have this little pencil because these are all little things, right? These are all little things. But then I have this one big thing that's a sexual trauma. Look at that. It's just as big. After all these add up, it's just as big as this. So it's not necessarily that these are unimportant, because these can add up and they can affect you. Because remember, these are little T's. They're not life-threatening, but they cause distress for us. So then I start to learn different things, like maybe not to trust people, right? Because people leave, people go away. So I start having all these other kinds of feelings and things like that aren't necessarily PTSD, like types of symptoms because of a life-threatening event, but they're more like avoidance of having relationships with people, avoidance of getting close to people because I'm scared, because all these people left me in some kind of way, right? So then I start having abandonment issues. So it's very, it's just it's just very unique. So everybody's situation is unique to them. So something that might cause one person a little T or a big T may not cause them PTSD, okay, compared to somebody else. So moving on to the large T's, we kind of talked about all of them. They're the large events, the life-threatening events, such as the natural disasters, even a terrorist attack, right? Sexual assault, combat, car or plane accidents. So basically, you feel helplessness, okay? That's the main thing there for a big T trauma, is that you feel helpless. You have no control over what has happened, okay? And the extent of experienced helplessness is far more than what happens in a small T trauma. So in a big T, you just completely helpless. A small T, you might have had some control over the situation. You see what I mean? So you don't feel completely helpless. And so I also want to add this. Avoidance takes a much different form with large T traumas. The individual tends to be more overtly and decisively engage in actions that are classified as avoidance. So they might deliberately avoid phone calls. They might get rid of their military uniforms and memorabilia and put it away in an attic so they don't re-see it. I've even have some veterans that tell me that it's hard for them to go onto the military installation because they see people with uniforms on, right? Also, they avoid crowded places and things like that. But when you have like little T traumas, more than likely you have some type of passive avoidance, but like you don't really, you could still go to large crowds and things like that. So it's a more passive avoidance. Okay. So I just wanted to kind of go over the differences between those little T's and the big T's, because I'm sure that, I'm going back to all my pens and pencils. You've experienced some little T's, right? You've experienced a hard breakup. You've experienced some separation in some kind of way, maybe abruptly, like me being in the military. My friends left all the time because their parents got stationed somewhere else, and my dad, for whatever reason, just kept staying in Germany. But it's okay. But seeing a lot of people leave, or maybe your parents got divorced, or maybe you got divorced. Maybe you feel like you don't have enough money right now and it's causing you some stress. So those are little T's and they add up, y'all. They add up to a big thing. So I don't want you to overlook those. I don't want you to minimize them. I want you to be attentive to your feelings. And especially if you've had a big T trauma, those sexual assaults, physical assaults, any car accidents, things like that. Pay attention to some of those symptoms that or signs. I want to just say signs, not symptoms, but some of those signs that I said, trouble concentrating, having difficulty remembering things. If you're having bad dreams that you're like, I don't know what this dream keeps, but I keep having the same recurring dream that, somebody's chasing me. It could be related to some traumatic event that you had. Okay. And always, if you or someone has experienced any type of trauma and they need help, the first number that you can dial is 988. I know it's the suicide prevention line, but it's really helpful because they can attach you to resources. You can also go on to the National Suicide Hotline and see, like you can Google it and then you'll pull it up and you can, there's many resources out there for any of it. If it doesn't matter what type of issue you are having, they will connect you to the right resource. Okay. And that's the easiest number to dial. And remember, it's just like 911, but you dial 988. The three numbers I know is 411 for pain, for the injury, 988 for mental health stuff, and 911 for emergency help, but just, if you dial 988, they will link you to the right resources, as well as you could contact me, and I can direct you to the right resources. Okay. I hope that you've learned something from this little get together that we had tonight. And, the way I'm wearing this color, it's not necessarily teal, but teal is the color for post-traumatic stress disorder awareness. And so that's our hope, is that, we can bring awareness to everyone. If you have endured multiple small T traumas or even one large T trauma, and that you're aware of its impact on your life, you can get help. You don't have to suffer in silence. And there are treatments that can help you, right? Some of the treatments, which I didn't mention, are EMDR, which is eye movement desensitization. That is, that's a type of treatment that you can use. Then there's prolonged exposure therapy, which is not my favorite. It's what I did. There's cognitive processing therapy, very similar to some of the things that they do in exposure therapy, but you kind of write it out. I do what's called brain spotting. I love doing brain spotting because it's not as re-traumatizing as some of the other therapies, but there is help. Okay. Help is available and you can get better, right? At the least, it can decrease your distress, okay? You may not completely be healed, but you can decrease your stress. So reach out to a mental health provider and, and get some help if that's you. If anything that I've mentioned and it resonates with you, or you feel like it's you or someone you know, help them help themselves, okay? So anyway, that's going to be a wrap for tonight. That was PTSD Awareness Month. Next week, I'm not really sure what we're going to talk about, but I do have a special guest. I'm trying to get someone else to come on to talk about some men's health, but I do have someone on the 27th coming in, so we'll have a special guest. Don't forget, tomorrow we're going to be talking about some men's sexual disorders. So tune into that, and that's at 11. I'll try to share it on my pages as well. And yeah, that's it, you guys. Have a great night. And as always, I am here. It is now, and I am alive. And so are you. So I will see y'all next week. Be safe. And yes, Ryan, I can't wait to see you on Thursday night either. So I got 1.5 more days left before I see my babies. So my son and my daughter. So I'm excited to see you guys as well. So good night. Good night, Michelle. Good night, everybody. I will see y'all next week.